How do you buy a good business at a great price? Our guest today is Richard Parker. He is a distinguished M&A expert with a wealth of experience, which includes the successful acquisition of 14 companies ranging from 50,000 to over 200 million, and advisory roles and transactions surpassing 2 billion. And he was actually hired by the Ray Dalio family office for several years to mentor Ray Dalio's son in the art of acquiring small businesses. And so tons of experience here. And I'm really excited to talk about today business acquisitions and how to seize the current market opportunity, as well as insights on the barriers that hinder business growth and entrepreneur action. So Richard, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation. We're glad you're here.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you having me. There's a lot in your intro, so I'm eager to get going and lots to cover. That's terrific.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the landscape, the business buying and selling landscape as it is right now.
Okay, so the cool thing about business buying and selling, especially at the lower market, and it's not really textbook defined, but I'm talking more for individuals, aspiring entrepreneurs, small business owners versus billion-dollar sales and purchases. The cool thing is the landscape stays pretty steady outside of some catastrophic economic events like back in 2008, where there was a dip for quite a while. You know, for the most part, it stays pretty steady, pretty even keel, very active. Certain things will impact potentially some valuations or some deal structure. Interest rates go up, interest rates go down, those type of things. But the landscape itself and the way, right now what we're talking about, because interest rates have gone up and there's a little bit of uncertainty in the market, this sort of never-ending economic downturn keeps being talked about. It's actually a pretty flourishing time on the buy side of things. Although the sell in the lower market has remained strong, it is a really good time for entrepreneurs to get into business, simply because people with fear who may not have true entrepreneurial blood running through their veins, they get a little nervous when the economy or something goes, off the rails a little bit. So less buyers typically means more activity, better deal flow. So it really is a pretty cool time.
Got it. Now, what industries are maybe you most familiar with or that are the ones that are thriving the most right now? And given all of the stuff that's going on right now, by the time of this recording, we do not know who the next president is. We will know after when this is released. But all that being said, where should people be kind of leading in?
Well, judging by the last election, we may not know by the time this podcast airs. Anyways,
fair enough.
It's entirely possible. The industries that are really hot right now, both sides of the equation. When I say both sides, buy and sell side, home services are on fire. HVAC companies, plumbing, electrical, anything that you go to the home to service repeatedly on a recurring, not reoccurring, but on a true recurring basis. Multiples have gone absolutely bonkers. And you get a lot of the institutional buyers, private equity firms, family offices have gotten into the mix, and that typically pushes up the multiples. A lot of them are on a roll-up initiative, and so the multiples have gone absolutely crazy. And so what that does is great for business owners, good time to potentially exit. For individual or smaller buyers, makes it infinitely more difficult because you can't get into a slugfest with an institutional investor. I mean, you're just not going to be able to match the way they get deals done, prices that they pay, and that sort of thing. So those industries have gotten really, really hot. Home services are always good industries. Now, there are some other ones as well: pest control, alarm companies, window washing, etc. So there are some really nice ones that have stayed out of the fray, if you will, of the institutional investors. And those are always pretty popular businesses. But the hottest industries undoubtedly are those type of home service companies that I mentioned.
I know you and I talked previously about absentee businesses and why you don't want to buy one of those. So maybe talk a little bit, let's go kind of the nitty gritty of what do you want to look for in a business? What's a good viable business to buy versus one that you kind of want to steer away from right out of the gate?
Okay, so, and we did talk about absentee run businesses. My line that I've been using for years is absentee run businesses usually equal absentee profits. It's very hard on the smaller scale. If we're talking about more owner operator type businesses, you can work towards getting management into place. And
Mm-hmm.
that could be a terrific goal for people. But you have to acquire business. You've got to get in there, operate the business, learn the business. Most people buy a business in an industry that they're not familiar with. And so learning that business, getting the guts of that business in your belly is critically important, because you can't make any decisions. You can't just put in a manager from day one if you have no experience running that type of business. The manager quits, gets hit by a Pepsi truck. I mean, you don't even have enough experience to know whom to hire, what skill set. So you've got to get immersed in it. Yes, you could transition out eventually. High level things, for example, the number one criteria, whether it be for an individual looking to acquire business, and then we can talk about some business owners looking to grow through acquisition. For individuals, you've got to match your greatest skill set with what that business needs to drive its revenue and profits. So the tagline is always, from my perspective, is whatever it is that you do best has to be the single most important driving factor of the revenue and profits of any business you consider purchasing.
That's good.
Along those lines, you don't want to confuse experience with expertise. Experience is the industries where you may have worked. Expertise is what you did well at those jobs.
Yeah.
What you did exceptionally well should match with what that business needs. And there's a process by which you can figure that out by visiting a number of businesses. Other red flags, for example, businesses that have a high level of customer concentration. Where far too much revenue comes from too few customers, or there's issues if you're talking about in retail type businesses where there's lease exposure, competitive exposure. I was talking with a buyer today where they were far down the road. Through a colleague of mine, had a couple of questions and came across me, and I said to him, when was the last time they did road construction? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, no, the road. That's the road. That's where the plaza borders. And it was a big location. And he said, well, we have no idea. I said, well, go check that out. And sure enough, it was actually I had that conversation today. And in the interim was they found out that the last road construction was done, I think it was 14 years ago. Typically, road construction is going to happen every 10 years, municipally speaking. And so there's a very good chance within a year or two they own that business that there's going to be major road construction right outside their store. People may not be able to get in for a period of time. So understanding those nuances and related to specific businesses are really important. Those big mistakes. You're going to make a mistake when you buy a business. I mean, you're going to make mistakes along the way. You're not perfect. You just want to avoid the big ones, like concentration, like paying for cash sales, reported cash sales that don't materialize, those type of things. Big items that can actually become catastrophic.
Well, and when you say that, I think how many businesses really think about, like, they think location, but how many of them think about all around the services like that? I mean, when the road, I mean, who does that?
I do that.
You do.
I do that
because you have the experience.
Right.
I'm gonna guess that came from learning a lesson when it didn't work. You found yourself in that situation, and it's really, that's why I think it's so important that you have. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a business advisor, but that you have a business coach or advisor or somebody that knows what they're doing to look at some of the things. Because most times, especially if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, you just new kind of, maybe you worked at a company for years and now you're going to start a business. And what do they usually look at? They usually look at all the positives, all the upsides. And this is like a shoe in, this is a surefire, thing. And that's usually a red flag for me. And I think about somebody that I know and somebody comes to him as an investor with a deal. And he says, I look at, and when I put deals together, he says the same thing, is I'm looking for people to shoot holes in it, because
absolutely,
you want to start there and see how many holes can we shoot in this, and how bad, look at that downside, and then we can go back to looking at is the upside there.
It's a great observation. I've been involved with thousands of transactions, looked at God knows how many business. I've lost count a long time ago. I'm doing this for over 3 decades. I still learn something new in every deal, every single deal, at least one thing, usually more. If you're anyone thinking about buying a business, to think that they could do this without the right advisory team, accountant, attorney, advisor, knowledge base. Mistakes are made when people go into a new area or a new initiative and don't equip themselves with the knowledge they need. Just because you've been worked at a company doesn't mean you're prepared to run a company. Just because you have an MBA from a fancy college, that education doesn't even conjugate with the knowledge you need to buy a business. And so whether you're during the process of buying a business or running a business, the biggest thing you could admit to yourself and to the world is to know what you don't know and align yourself with believable parties, really people that have been there, done that, and can do this, can help you do this successfully. And most people are very helpful. Most people are happy to lend a lending hand, especially to aspiring entrepreneurs who may not have done this. So you've just got to ask. But to think that you could do this on your own without that type of top level help, I mean, you're just asking to make a poor investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about, coming back to what you were saying a few minutes ago about the difference, right? You have an individual who wants to buy a business versus a business doing additional acquisition. What do they need to be taking into consideration? I know there's just business owners who are like, well, I'm successful here, so they kind of assume that they got this, right? And then they go and they expand into markets that they know nothing about. And it affects. So there's some different things. There's like phases of the business. You got to know where you're at and all that. So can you speak to that?
Sure. The easiest way to grow your business is through acquisition. I mean, organic growth is wonderful. Everybody feels terrific about it. Plans come into place. But the shortcut, you buy into someone's learning curve. I built all my businesses that way. However, you want to stick to the knitting. By that, I mean, you want to be able to buy something that either is competitive or ancillary. Competitive means you own a chain of quick oil changes. Well, you want to buy a bunch more. Or you own a distribution company in ethnic foods. You want to buy your competitor. That's sort of an easy one. Ancillary businesses, there's where you add on products, where you may buy a competitor or you buy a business that has additional, may not be dry goods, spices of ethnic foods. It may be something else related to ethnic foods that you can add on. So think competitive or ancillary. But the overarching theme, the way to look at this is when you have a business, you have clients. Those clients are worth gold. And it's very easy to sell the same clients something else in addition, because people are comfortable buying. I mean, I read something many, many years ago. It said the statistic way back, and it was in that book, Thriving on Chaos by Tom Peters. And he said, clients that are not necessarily thrilled with a supplier are still 60% more inclined to buy from them because there's a relationship. And so I look at it and say, and I don't mean to sound crude with all of this, but you have a client base. Look at that as your pipeline. Okay. And so the goal is figure out how you could sell more shit to the same pipeline, how you can stuff more products or services into that pipeline. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to go outside. You don't have to develop necessarily new markets. But a great way to expand quickly is sell more stuff to your existing client base. And you can grow from there. They could, whether it be geographically or with additional products. But, if you have a good customer base, I mean, that's golden. Yeah. Whatever that looks like, retail, wholesale, distribution, manufacturing, that customer base is golden. Priceless.
Yeah. Well, and what I hear in there is a lot of times, and you want to create more value. How can you create more value for that customer base rather than going? So when people think about industries and saying, I don't know anything about this industry, or sure, that's a really hot industry, is really looking at, does it serve the same ideal audience? And so it's really more about who are you serving and what are the things that they need, the additional services, as opposed to just lucrative industries and going from there. And so I think that's an important distinction. It's a really good question for people to ask themselves. Are you going to be serving the same audience, the same customers, your existing customers, and the same audience that you've learned to get to know and be familiar with? Or are you going to have to come up with a whole new audience to do that? And I think that's gold right there,
Right.
to be able to look at it that way. So that's good.
Well, along those lines, very often people will go outside their area of expertise, acquire other businesses, unrelated business, the world of the entrepreneur. I can't say I bought many different businesses over the years, completely unrelated. However, if you want to grow your existing business, the way to grow it, if you can, is to find more product or service to sell to your existing customer base. That doesn't prevent you in any way, shape, or form if you own a distribution business to buy a manufacturing business that has nothing related to it. That's just in your entrepreneurial pursuits, and people own many different types of businesses. But from the platform of growing an existing business, think about the value that you've already created.
Yeah.
Which is that customer base, and how you can add more products or services to that.
Well, and there's also, I'm sure when you did that, you have some resource. You need to have some resource to allocate to that, versus like if your business is just at a point where it can sustain itself and there's nothing extra, then, going and buying a business. I think about years ago, there was this woman business owner, and she was doing quite well. She'd been in business for 8 years. It was, very hands-on, owner operated. And then her husband came in, who came from a completely different industry, and hers was aesthetics. And he's coming in, he's like, look, I'm going to show her how this is done. So he
ruined everything. I was just going to say, did he ruin everything?
And he's like, we're going to expand and we're going to do all these locations and so forth over the summer. Like, we're going to add 3 locations onto the one in 3-month period of time. And, taking from Peter to pay Paul and doing that. And it was just like, what are you doing? Stop right now. That business was thriving. It was profitable. And you just literally took all of its lifeblood and you're starting to, apply it over here. And you don't know how to do that. And you're trying to figure out, you need to have some cash flow or some resources, and some backing to be able to do that, because.
And the brains.
Yeah. And the brains.
And the brains, let's not forget the brains.
It's important. And you got to be, I think there's also in that humility, which he did not have, the humility to ask. And because, he thought he knew it. So I'm sure there's a few of us out there that have that tendency to think we know.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. And we have tons of war stories, but it's a perfect example. I witnessed it for many years and multiple times, where when people come in guns a-blazing, whether it be as an employee or what have you, when they come in guns a-blazing, they generally are, my experience has been, they're generally hiding something. Their skills, they've either oversold their skill set, or it's compensating for what they think that showing people that they make fast decisions and they move quickly is a skill. It's not always a skill. Moving methodically, practically, and with common sense often is a much better skill. And so as you were telling the story, I'm thinking, I'm sure the conclusion here is it probably screwed everything up. Not surprising, because that female, the lady who owned that business, she had a gut feel for that business. She knew what would work. Now, maybe she may have lacked the resourcefulness, if you will, or the experience to how do I leverage capital to open up another location or whatever. But the innate understanding of that business resides in her belly. I mean, she gets it. Right. And no one else can tell her different. And I'm sure when people are open-minded, someone else comes in with newer ideas. It's great. But when you try to flip it around, like, why are you going to screw around with a successful formula? You just want to how do we explode it? Explode it.
Yeah. So good. Let's talk about that, actually, funding a business and some creative financing, because I know that, I look at my dad, for example. He owned, his first business was an Esso back in Canada, which is like
Where in Canada? I remember that.
Toronto.
Okay, so from Montreal, I used to collect those NHL power player hockey stickers from Esso. I don't know how old you are. It was NHL
so
power
many
play.
of those. Yes.
Power players are hockey stamps that Esso made. Put them in your saver album. Fun to save and fun to trade. And NHL power players. I used to drive my father bonkers. If he needed like 7 cents worth of gas, I made him go to the gas station.
That's funny. Well, yeah. So he had an Esso station, and he used to do that. We used to watch also Hockey Night in Canada all the time. So anyways, but, and you said you were from Montreal, from Toronto. Obviously the Maple Leafs are from Toronto, but I know. I was going to say we were actually Canadians fans, so we
smart. I knew you were smart the first time I met you. So perfect. I mean, we watched like three. Oh yes,
and Patrick Waugh, and all Larry Robinson, all those. Yeah. So anyway,
beautiful.
Coming back to that, so he had an Esso station in the Gilwood Village, and it was doing really well. And then when he he sold that, bought the Sunoco station on Progress and 401 and Kennedy Road and 401, and in order to grow that, he thrived and everything was going great up to this point. Sold one business, bought another. Great. Then he went into another industry, wanted to explode it, right? And so he goes into this other industry, and he did not at that time have the understanding that he could leverage against, his equity and all that stuff. So he sold that business to put the money into this other thing.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out and lost everything. And that business, a Sunoco business, is now sitting on a property, which next to it is this huge plaza, Kennedy Commons, and it's anybody in Toronto knows. It's like, and you think about it and you're like, oh my gosh, but he didn't have any mentors he didn't come from a entrepreneurial background. He was a mechanic. Yeah. He knew how to work on cars. He had the gift of the gab, and people loved him. He was the magic in the business. And so how often that happens where we don't realize what's available, to us. Yes, there are some that take it a little bit too far, right? And they're over leveraging and so forth. But so talk a little bit about what someone needs to know in order to kind of get into that space, and how do you actually go about it? Right.
So one thing before jumping into that, just some context related to the story that you're telling. It's incredible how many blue collar individuals, like your dad, plumbers, electricians, dock builders, whatever. I play hockey still several times a week, although I'm on IR now. Guys that I work with, it's a blue collar sport, and guys that I play with who are plumbers, electricians, dock builders, etc., that have a little bit of business acumen, how they've been able to leverage that with incredible success. Because you don't have, you may have people with a lot of entrepreneurial acumen who don't have the blue collar skills to turn a wrench. So when you have the combination of someone who can turn a wrench,
the work ethic and all
the work ethic and a bit of entrepreneurial blood, they could really do incredible things. Yeah. So in your dad's case, it's just a lack of know-how and expertise. That he could leverage it. He may have been, in that situation, say, look, I don't want to take any debt. Maybe he wasn't comfortable with it and saying, I'll sell this one, buy the other one. That's okay. But you have to get comfortable with debt because it's the only way to have any type of leverage. Would be best explained to your dad who was trying to prop up a tire, right? I mean, you need leverage. And so when you have one business, you're looking to acquire another. For example, in the US, you have SBA programming that will fund a current business owner to acquire a like business. They will fund that. It's a beautiful situation because if you could have some leverage, like I built all my business that way. Once I had one good solid one, I never took money out of the second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. I just used all that money to pay down debt or grow the business. Mm-hmm. And so in the US, you have things like SBA. In Canada, there's also commercial banks. Commercial banks will be much more open-minded about lending money to an existing entrepreneur business owner with a bit of a track record of success than the average person walking off the street. They're not lending the money. It's got to be through a government program, both north and south of the border. Right. So you have a big advantage if you've got this operating, gas station with 3 bays of doing mechanics or what have you, and you want to buy something else. You have a track record. It may become more difficult if it's something completely different, but you've got to use leverage. Similarly, there's a lot of investors that are going to bet on someone with a track record. They don't have the opportunity to get into business. Sometimes it's your accountant, your attorney, friends. I mean, I try to stay away from friends and family, and thank goodness, it's been many years that I've had to rely on them. But there are, investment groups. There's gobs of money floating around. Gobs. It's got to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a bit of a track record, it's just the matter of getting your story in front of the right person. There's also, seller finance. We sell a program on how to buy a good business at a great price. And 91% of our clients have a component or a significant component of seller financing. I think in Canada, they call it VTBs, like vendor take back.
Yep.
But it's a seller note. And so that's a big part of it. And sellers there too will be more inclined to help finance the transaction when they're dealing with someone who has a bit of a track record. And in the smaller deals, seller financing is the only way to get them to the finish line. So there really are options for leverage. Buying, one of the biggest things that I have to convince people about, I mean, I don't sell them on this, but to explain to them, this is doable, right? This buying business is not just for, rich people or big companies. It's very doable.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of a client that I was working with and still working with, but she just sold her business, and she did that seller financing for this couple that bought her salon, and that was the only way that deal was going to get done.
Correct.
They weren't going to be able to do it any other way, and it's going to work out to benefit everybody. And and so it's great, but you got to think outside the box. And I had them on the call, and they were kind of like, we can't do this. We tried to get financing and blah, 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 whatever. And I was like, well, entrepreneurs create something out of nothing. Let's just explore what the possibilities are.
Exactly.
And when we did that, they were like, really? I can do that?
I can do that. People aren't aware. And at the lower level, very often you can't get the deal done any other way. Banks aren't lending. People don't have that level of capital. That's why it's very important as a buyer or a seller, you want to establish a meaningful relationship with the other side. The numbers are important. That's the easiest part of the deal. But making sure that, you like them, you trust them. From a buyer's perspective, do I like this person? I always tell people 4 questions you ask yourself after the first seller meeting. Do I like them? Do I trust them? Do I like the business? Can I see myself operating it? And from a seller's perspective, similarly, do I like them? Do I trust them? Can I see them operating the business? And I would potentially be willing to finance them. You may not arrive at that answer immediately. So establishing a meaningful relationship with them, going a good back and forth, not confrontational, developing, good conversations with them takes multiple meetings. And then you start to get comfortable with one another. Both sides, when a buyer wants to buy and a seller wants to sell, and they like and trust each other, you can't stop them from getting a deal done.
Yeah. They find
a way. They'll figure it out. They'll find a way.
That's good. Let's talk about, from a seller's perspective, in terms of selling your business. How do you set your business up? What would you recommend for people to set their business up for sale? Because there's a lot of people who, they like the dream of selling their business at one day, but their business is not set up to be sold because, for example, like they're the magic, right, in the business, or they've built themselves so into the business. So we talked about absentee owners, but then there's the other side of it, which is you're so integral into the business that, you take you out and it all falls apart. So what do they need to do to set themselves up?
Okay. There's 3 really important things here. The first one is, you should run your business like you have to sell it.
Even if you're not going to.
Even if you're not going to. Run it like you have to sell it. I have a buddy of mine said, you got to run it almost like the IRS is coming in tomorrow to do an audit. But similar to that is run it like you have to sell it. Because not only is that going to make your business better today, even if you have no plans to sell it, when the time comes to sell, it'll be in better shape. And throughout that period, your business is going to do better. When you think about running it like you have to sell it. And what does that mean? A couple of double clicks to that. The first is, or second point overall is, think about what keeps you up at night about your business. Anything that keeps you up at night about your business, whether it be customer concentration, whether it be recruiting, training and retaining staff, whether it be marketing, whatever keeps you up about the business, and make no mistake, every entrepreneur stays up at night about at least one part about their business, because whatever keeps you up at night about your business is going to be magnified to the power of 10 in the eyes of a buyer, because they don't have the understanding of the business like you do. So you want to solve for that and mitigate that and reduce that as best you can. Again, it could be customer concentration or what have you. So what keeps you up at night about the business? The third thing is to ask yourself, what happens if you get hit with a Pepsi Cola truck? What happens to the business? If the business can't continue, you haven't built a good business. Now,
Yeah.
it may be a case of saying, well, our staff can take over, but they're eventually going to need someone to come to place. That's great. That's okay. It's if the business craps the bed after you get hit by the Pepsi truck, you haven't built any value in your business. Zero. No one's going to buy. If the chances of someone buying it are reduced dramatically, because that's typically a business where, the assets of the business leave at 5 o'clock. And so you want to avoid that. And how do you do that? Good policies, procedures you put into place so people understand how things work, what has to happen. There's an operating manual for all of the components of the business. You should be able to take 6 weeks vacation. If you have employees, you should be able to take 6 weeks vacation easily and never call your business. I had one client, he took off 3.5 years. At one point, he went 6.5 months during those 3.5 years and didn't call the office.
Wow.
So that's extreme. But if you can't take time off from your business, I know people were so addicted to our cell phones, whatever, and email. But if you can't take off 6 weeks and not call the business or not be in touch with the business, you haven't built the right business.
Yeah. Well, and I think in that it's interesting. Yeah. Let's be clear that he's probably looking at numbers though, right? Is he looking at that business at all during that time? He's paying attention to the reports. He may not just call in. And so I think sometimes people have this, because there's so much out there right now that, it's like, oh, you buy these businesses and like vending machines, you don't have to do anything, and it's like,
no, you have to do something.
You have to do something.
You can't make enough money unless you have hundreds of machines to have people filling up the machines, ordering inventory, dealing with broken machines, dealing with theft. Stuff happens. So there's very few hands-off businesses. I used to work with a guy, his name was Jerry Efros. He was an older gentleman. He's since passed away. He's a wonderful guy. He was a tail gunner in World War II. And when people used to ask him, what's the perfect business? He'd tell them, buy a toll booth. Right? That's about the only thing. People are just driving through and giving you money. Other than that, every business needs hands-on work. Now, you can eventually lay off a little bit, get the right people in place. Don't keep taking out every penny that the business is producing in profit. So, you have money to build a business and put in good staff. But that whole concept of not doing anything, there's a tremendous, social media and the internet has been wonderful for buying and selling businesses and for entrepreneurship. But on the other hand, it's been devastating, because there's a tremendous amount of misinformation and disinformation. And, the difference being disinformation when people are purposely putting out, bad information. There's a lot of that. And so you have to be very cautious. But the world of entrepreneurship exists. It's available to anybody. But, just these ideas of absentee or vending machine, whatever, business, it takes work. And especially at the beginning, it's front loaded. You got to work these things, roll up your sleeve and deal with all the heartburn and the stress and whatever. And it's not for everybody. If it was that easy, everybody would be an employer, not an employee.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your biggest mistake in business. And
the show isn't long enough.
You got a long list. Well, and that's why you're successful, because you fail your way to success. But even like you, what's your biggest mistake, or one that might be relevant to this conversation? And I'd even love to hear, like, what was your first business, like, and how you kind of got into that?
12 years old. I'll tell you that story in a second.
Okay.
So mistakes, certainly early on in my career as a young business owner, I owned my first business at 29. When I say I had one at 12, I did. But as far as in my adult life, I became a business owner at 29. I was a young business owner. And for a number of years, I really let my ego and insecurities get in the way of me operating the business, and really prevented me from hiring people that were bigger, better, faster than me. And so I'm not sure if there really wasn't a particular incident. As I recall, certain things happened along the way, but when I finally realized a couple of things, when I hire better people, my business is better. It's not about being right. It's about getting it right. And that evolution to, not having to be the smartest one in the room. And I attached that to ego and insecurity, because I was always at the table with people older than me. And so now, for many, many years, I look at now, if I'm the smartest one in the room, I'm in the wrong room. And I think those are all tied together, right? As far as, ego and how you operate and learning. So, but the underpinnings to all of that was when I finally recognized that to surround myself with people that were much smarter than me, bigger, better, faster, just made me much better.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. Any businesses I've bought 13 companies and plus one co-investment in a wide range. The real bad decisions were ones where I wasn't the right person to run the business, because I typically bought businesses, went and learned them, operated them, grew them, either sold them or brought in someone else. And when I was not the right person to operate that business, business went south in a hurry. So it's always been, top of the pyramid, the food chain, when I teach and preach people to people how to buy businesses, how to buy a good business at a great price, is the match of your top skill set to the right business. It's so far ahead being the most important thing that you could do a marginal job. There's 23 steps in the business buying process. You could do a marginal job on 22 of them. As long as you do a stellar job in matching your skill set to the right business, you're going to be okay. Conversely, if you do an unbelievable job on the 22 steps, but you screw up as far as what business right for you, you're going out of business. You're going out of business, I guarantee it, and you're going out of business quickly.
Yeah. Well, and those first few tips that you gave us, and you just circled back to them, is that's how you learn them. Sometimes is the best way to learn. Not the best. I wouldn't say the best way to learn, but one of the most common ways to learn is because we go through it and we do it ourselves. So yeah, that's good.
It is helpful. Sometimes, it's sometimes the big mistakes is what you do with them and how you learn from it. Sometimes the learning just takes longer years, as far as just being able to have some perspective. And I've been very lucky. I've been luckier than I've been smarter, and so it's worked out pretty good.
That's good. That's good. You know what? It's funny because luck, what does it stand for? Laboring under correct knowledge. Sometimes there is a little bit of luck and blessing, or whatever you want to call it, being in the right place at the right time with the right people or the right industry at the right time. There's some of that, certainly,
and you hear all those stories, like, the harder I work, the luckier I get, those type of things. And sometimes in the world of entrepreneurship, you have to just get used to it. I mean, there's plenty of times I think back, it was Monday or Tuesday. I didn't know how the hell I was going to make payroll on Friday, all those type of things. So you really just have to keep one nostril above the water. You just got to keep swimming. And if you keep swimming, you're going to make progress.
Yeah. Tell us
about,
you
say in Canada, progress, right?
Progress.
Right?
Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit about your 12-year-old business that you started when you were 12.
Well, that was great. It was in Montreal. There was a newspaper delivered on Sunday called the Sunday Express. You had to go to the store to buy it. It wasn't a home delivery. And Montreal, as you know, Toronto's cold, Montreal's bitter cold. I used to walk up to the store as a young kid, pick up the paper from my father on a Sunday, and used to hate it. And I remember thinking, like, why can't we just get this delivered? Found out they don't deliver it. It's all have to be picked up at the local convenience store, what have you, local shop. And so I called the Sunday Express and said to them, I want to start delivering newspapers in my neighborhood. And they didn't have any in place, but I said, well, please give me a chance to do it. You could drop off the papers. You're dropping them off at the corner store, drop off, 20 or 50 papers. I'll go out and see if I can get people to sign up. So I went around my neighborhood, got a bunch of people to sign up. They agreed to drop off this bundle to me and pay me 2 cents per paper. They sold for 15 cents a paper. They pay me 2 cents a paper plus my tips. So at the beginning, it was terrific, because when you went to collect at 15 cents, people gave you a quarter. You got to keep a dime plus the 2 cents. Then the price went up because I started building up a lot of these. I had hundreds and hundreds of people on my route. And so I started after a little while. Then they upped the price from 15 to 20 cents. Well, we went to collect, people were still giving me the same darn quarter. So my revenue was dropping dramatically. It went from 10 cents of a tip to 10 cents to 5 cents. So it dropped in half. I still got to keep the 2 cents. I said, this is crazy. So, and I was working hard. So I started farming out these routes to kids in my neighborhood. I had like 800 papers or something. It was crazy, maybe 1,000, and started selling them in like tranches of 100 papers, and said, look, you keep all the tips. You go out, you deliver, you get a nickel of paper. I was still getting the 2 cents. And I went from, my allowance used to be like a quarter or something. And suddenly I'm going to making having 20, 30 bucks a week in my pocket. It was just ridiculous. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I wish I saved all of it.
Yeah. What did you spend it on?
Candy and crap.
But you know what? There's such a
Hockey sticks, the usual.
yeah, the going to
Yeah,
SO.
hockey with the SO cards. Yeah, baseball cards. I couldn't spend it fast enough.
Well, but what a lesson in like the little microcosm of this business. I don't know, when I think about like, is that where the paper route started? Like, it was Richard. Richard started it. No, but what a brilliant idea. You saw a need and a gap in the marketplace, and you weren't even thinking about it. You just went like, "Hey, I'm going to do this," and it's being resourceful.
The genesis was I didn't want to walk to the. I guess like the genesis was, if I'm going to freeze my butt off walking to the store, I might as well make some money. I might as well make some money at this. Like, I don't want to keep doing that. And as I've thought about it over the years, because I've been a guest on a number of shows, and I've thought about this more, I realized, like, put some thinking into what my thought process was and all that. So what started out as I don't want to walk to the store anymore, to, hey, what about this? Why don't they have it? And I'm not a really, and I don't mean to be just totally self-deprecating. I'm not a brilliant guy by any means. I never went to university, but that intellectual curiosity, and not suggesting that it's the intellect, but the intellectual curiosity. That I've been blessed in my life. I've worked with some ridiculous successful people, billionaires, who've been, and one of the things that these people do is they don't focus on the money. They're focused on building a great business or what have you. And so from my standpoint, all the businesses that I've either got into, or a lot of them, have come from just like, I'm thinking about this, right? Sometimes I go down a dangerous path. But if you have people to poke holes in your theory, and you have that the intellectual curiosity, I think that it bodes well, which is, something, another subject, scares the crap out of me, because I think a lot of kids now don't have that imagination time. And for me, it was, or my generation is, you had a lot of time on your hands, good time to dream and imagine and what have you. And I don't want to get overly philosophical, but reverting to that, thinking that, the internet and all that stuff is wonderful, but sometimes you need to just step back, clear your head, meditate, as I do anyways, and, and get some context and perspective, and think about this in a different way. And if you have that curiosity, most people are going to do pretty well as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And you know what, to your point, I believe that there's a lot of entrepreneurs that, there's a lot of young people, let's put it this way, that, I think we're all entrepreneurial minded. And then
not all of us, but a good amount of us.
It gets taught out of us, though, yes. As we're young. You think of kids, and they dream, and they have all these ideas, and then, they get to school, and school tells them, this is how you should do it. And they start into that conformity and so forth. But we're all creative. Like, we're dreaming, we're making up forts in our, in our living room and all that. But when you now put them in front of the TV, and you put them in front of a phone or a screen for hours on end, and now it's all about serve me, or they're entitled to the next thing, or they're just basically, it's just like, entertain me.
Oh, absolutely.
Kids need to be entertained.
And every minute. That's why, like, Elon Musk still blows my mind. He's still the most intriguing man in the world to me. He's still that kid who's sitting at a desk while they're trying to teach math, and he's drawing pictures of rockets. He's still that kid. When you get out to recess, he's telling you about this idea, and you say, this kid is whacked, right? But he's just, the mind is always going.
But those are the ones that change the mind. The change the world. Yeah,
absolutely. The mind is always going in a wonderful, wonderful way. It's like, really stimulating themselves from they've just got this, wild imagination, and it's channeled in the right way. That's why it sticks out so much. To me, it's a thing of beauty. Someone asked me recently who I'd want to have lunch with more than anyone else who was living in. That's the guy. I just find him, when I saw him, recently at some appearance, he's still a kid. Like, he's still, when you were talking about, removing that imagination from kids, the first one who comes to my mind anyways, because it's still there.
Yeah. The wonder of a child. The wonder of a child. We need to have that.
It's all new. It's all fresh. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, you have a program. Let's quickly talk about it as we wrap up here. How to buy a good business at a great price. Tell us a little bit about what that is and who that's for.
That's for anybody who's looking to buy a business, acquire a business.
Any stage, or like, if they're new, if they're
new, any stage. I have plenty of clients who bought several businesses. They buy it, they still use it. I have one actually in Canada. They've They sold out recently for $100 million. They bought a small business years ago, bought a bunch of them after. They still use it. They now finance people. They still use it as he calls it. I think the video is on my YouTube channel, as their Bible for all their seller questions and due diligence. So it's anyone at point in the process, but it reduces every step in the process dramatically to what you need to know, what you need to do, and how to do it. And it's not dummied down by any means. This is a big process, and can be, it's not difficult, but it's complicated. So it reduces the whole process into real bite-sized pieces, all 23 steps in the process. We've been very lucky. I wrote it just to help one person, never think it would turn into a business. We've sold over 100,000 of them. And so we've have clients in over 80 countries. We've helped a lot of people. I have no more room on our website for testimonials. We have binders of them. It's brilliant. And we have a lot of, I'm in the help business on the buy side. I just like to see people try to accomplish what I've been so blessed and lucky to be able to do. So, on our website, richardparker.com, there's tons of articles and videos, free articles, free videos, free special reports. And the course is there if someone, wants to learn more. And tell people, I think you owe it to yourself to, at least if you have an ounce of interest in becoming an entrepreneur, or my late partner and cherished friend, Devin Dalio, used to say he has an entrepreneurial itch he wants to scratch. So if you have any of that, you owe it to yourself to find out what's involved. You don't have to do it, but you should learn about it and see what's involved. And I promise you, it's not that difficult.
Yeah, I love that. Richard, thank you so much. This has been rich. This has been really rich with nuggets, insight, practical things that we can take and apply. And I love that. I love that, especially when we talk about this topic here. And like you said, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation. And is it possible? Absolutely. You can do very, very well as an entrepreneur, and it takes some work, and it takes a step-by-step process. And I was going to circle back to that. You mentioned about the 23 steps. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. And, what are those 23 steps? How do you find them? So we'll direct people to your program. We'll make sure that the link to your website and all of that information is on the website. And thank you. It was just so much fun.
Great. It was nice talking to you. Nice talking to a fellow Canadian, although I'm an American now. I appreciate all
Me too.
Oh, and where are you located, by the way?
In San Diego, North County.
Smart. Okay.
Yeah.
So, it's nice talk. It's really wonderful talking with you, and really enjoyed our conversation. And I greatly appreciate you having me.
Likewise. And where are you?
I'm in Southeast Florida. I'm in Boca Raton, Florida. So between Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach.
So we both went south and to the warmer weather. Smart.
I'm going to Montreal tomorrow, actually. And believe it or not, it's 70 degrees there. I mean, it's going to be November in 2 days. I mean, it's crazy. So normally I'd get the puffer jacket, my Sorel boots at this time of year. My mother still lives up there, but it's actually gorgeous. I said, okay, just pack a couple t-shirts. This is going to be unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, you might want to throw a sweater in there just in case it turns while you're there.
Trust me, it'll be like 40 at 35 at night. Oh, yeah.
I was gonna say.
Give it an hour, right?
Yeah. So, Richard, such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Here. And thank you to our listeners for being here, and viewers. I hope you got a lot out of this. There's so much here. This is probably one of those episodes you want to listen to and re-listen to, and really take seriously that program that's available. If you're going to start, you're looking at buying businesses or, selling your business, whatever, but really look at what you need to know to make the most of that opportunity. And I know that for my client, it can make a huge difference in the end. Yeah. And so it's worth the investment so that you can make good decisions and move forward from there. So I encourage you to do that. I always say leaders of transformation take action. I encourage you to take action on that, and take informed action. Right. as you look at buying a business and or selling your business or whatever. So I encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories and how this has impacted you. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. Of course, we're all over social as well. And join us next week. We'll have another amazing guest. Actually, no, we won't, because when this comes out, it's going to be Christmas next week. So we will not have an episode next week, but the following week we will.
Yeah, so you'll have an amazing week. Not an amazing guest, but you'll have an amazing week.
We'll have an amazing week. Yes. So anyway, thanks so much for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.